Well, welcome everybody. Welcome everybody to the Nashville Modern Excel and Power BI user group. I got to get this off my screen. All right, 1 second. We've got a great presentation for you today. So it is the lunchtime, so feel free to grab some lunch if you'd like. That's still on there to remind us of the old days when we used to meet in person, and we're still aiming to do that in the future when it's safe to do that. So we're not sure when that'll be, but we're definitely looking forward to the time that we can get back together in person. So we got a few announcements. We have a great job opportunity coming up. Some of you guys may have heard from him just a moment ago. We got a little bit about what's new, not too much, a little slow this month, but a few really nice things. And then we've got a terrific presentation from Daniel Otykier. And forgive me if I don't get the accent on that right. But he's going to be speaking about Tabular Editor 3, which, as I've said numerous times, it's the best Power BI tool that is in Power BI. It's a absolutely wonderful tool, and I think it's a must-have in your toolbox if you're doing Power BI regularly. And we'll stick around for as long as we can. I actually will not be able to stick around, but hopefully Will and Seiki will. So let's go ahead and get started. So we can jump into the announcements. So just a couple of quick announcements. So the Nashville Analytics Summit for 2021, it is virtual this year, and it will be October 18th to the 19th. And so you can register. You can go to that link to register. It's a little bit hard. If you Google it, it's a little hard to find. So you might want to check out that link. If you want to get this link, we'll have this deck up on the Meetup site where you can grab it from there as well, or you can go to this. You can type that link in. There's usually several dozen presentations that go on, hundreds of people who attend the conference. It's a really terrific conference, and I'll be speaking there. So all the more reason to go. I just want to call out the LinkedIn page, so you can go to this URL as well and join our Nashville Power BI user group on LinkedIn. That's a great way to keep in touch and post about all the meetups there, and just some of the general things in the ether about Power BI and Power Platform. New in Power BI and the Power Platform this month. So first of all, there was an update for July. I think it came out the day before our last meetup. So this, I'm sure you guys are probably familiar with a lot of this stuff, but small multiples is generally available. So that's nice. We've been getting sort of small incremental updates to that every month for the last several months. So it's good to have that GA now. I know a lot of companies, I used to work with ACA, they wouldn't allow anything in their tenant that wasn't GA. So if your company has that policy, it's nice to be able to use the small multiples now. Some more conditional formatting things that have been turned on. Really nice one is the Power Automate visual. That is a preview feature, but it is now one of the built-in visuals. And so what that does is it puts action right next to insight. And so you can use Power BI reports to derive insight, which then instructs the actions that you might need to take, and then you can just put the action right there, right next to it. So you don't have to sort of make a note to go take an action and leave and then go take it and then wait for the results and come back later. You can really reduce that cycle. The new modeling view is generally available. So if anybody hasn't seen that, definitely be sure to go check that out. And direct query for analysis services and Power BI datasets updates is also a big one. We move next slide. If you watch the video, there is a demo of the streaming data flows, which I thought was really cool. This is, I think, a really nice way for companies to develop sort of pretty high-end solutions for event-driven or IoT-driven types of solutions without having to have a huge amount of engineering need, without having to take a whole lot of time to develop really elaborate, high-tech code. You can sort of do the as they say, the clicky draggy droppy technique of building streaming data flows, and it will archive it in Azure Data Lake and stream it to a Power BI data set. So that's really nice. One that I'm really excited about is mandatory label policies. So you can, if you're Power BI admin, you can make data sensitivity labels mandatory within your tenant. So if people publish data to Power BI, you can require that they set a data sensitivity label, which might be a bit onerous. Possibly that everything gets a data sensitivity label. Is required to have a data sensitivity label. But I think it's actually, if you're dealing with a lot of very sensitive data, if you're in healthcare, which if you're in Nashville, there's a good chance of that, then this might be something that you need to take a look at. So, and there's a few visuals and updates there as well. So, so these are some of the updates that have come out in the last month. There is also a public preview for Power BI REST API support for Dax queries. Sekou, as soon as that came out, Sekou texted that to me and Will, and he was super excited about that. So I was glad to see that. There's also single sign-on support for data gateways. So so it'll now work with Azure Directory, and so if you're doing a direct query to something like Snowflake or something like that will support single sign-on, then you can pass that identity through the data gateway now, and so you can enforce things like row level security and so forth. So there's a few updates for Power Apps. I'm just going to focus on one of these, which is the October 2021 release Wave 2 update. So that sort of gives us the roadmap for the next 6 months. So if you haven't seen that, be sure to check that one out. And then also for Power Automate, the latest Power Automate desktop came out, and also Gartner named Microsoft a leader in their 2021 robotic process automation Magic Quadrant. So those are all the updates that we have, and so I wanted to leave as much time as possible for what I call the best Power BI tool that is in Power BI, and that is Tabular Editor 3. The creator and genius behind it, Daniel Otykier, is here to talk to us all about it. And so with that, Daniel, I will turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, and first of all, I'm really flattered that you described the tool as like the best tool that is in Power BI and a must-have for any developer. That's some really nice words. I would say though that the version of Tabulated that I'm going to show you here today is our commercial version, Tabulated 3. So I can totally understand if it's not a must-have for all of you, since after all it's commercial. But I would say though that the open source version of Tabulated, which is also available and everyone can go ahead and download right away, which is completely free, that is definitely a must-have. And then for those of you who would like a more like luxury or premium experience, for you guys, we have this this commercial version that I'm going to demo here today. Feel free to ask away if there are any questions along the way. I'll also try to highlight if there are any some of the major differences between the paid version and the free version, just so you can appreciate the difference between them. So before we get started though, let me just share my screen here. It's pretty important to understand sort of what is the whole deal about Tabular Editor and the external tools for Power BI in general. So let me switch over to this machine, and hopefully you can all see my desktop here with the Power BI report. Maybe I can.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. So back in July of last year, we got this external tools functionality in Power BI. So we got the little ribbon up here at the top of the screen, where various tools start to show up based on what you have installed on your machine. So the classic ones, of course, are Alm Toolkit by Christian Wade, Dax Studio by Darren Gospel, and then of course Tabulated by me, and also now Tabulated 3. And so basically the idea is that since we got this integration, Microsoft sort of opened up Power BI Desktop for external tools to go ahead and make various changes or just read out information from the data model inside of the Power BI report. And the way it works is that any Power BI report that has a data model, either in import or direct query mode or composite, which would be a mix of these two modes, actually exposes what's called an XMLA endpoint. So that's basically the same kind of endpoint exposed by the Power BI service for those of you using Power BI Premium. And that means external tools can connect to that endpoint and browse the data model. You can even connect to your Power BI report from Excel. So basically, you could think of Excel as an external tool for Power BI in this regard, as long as you know what the port number of the analysis services instance running underneath Power BI is. So just to give you an example, if I launch Dax Studio here, for example, you'll see Dax Studio opens up here on my machine, and it will already be connected to Power BI. We can tell we have the list of tables in the model. This is sort of the internal name of the Power BI data set that we are connected to. And down here at the bottom right corner of the screen, where it says localhost and then the port number is basically the XMLA endpoint exposed by this data model. So if we remember this address and we go to Excel and we click on the data tab and choose get data from analysis services, and then we enter this address here. And keep in mind, this is all locally on my laptop here. I'm not using the Power BI service or anything. This is just by running Power BI desktop. Now we can connect to this data model, and we get this nice pivot table where we can actually use this to browse our data model using the standard Excel pivot table. And the idea is that thanks to this endpoint, tools can go and browse the model content. You can create your own tools. Microsoft has a guide for how to do that. Or of course, you can use some of the existing tools. And now Tabular Editor, which I'm going to talk about, is one of these tools, which not only allows you to browse the model, but it also allows you to make certain changes. Now, the history of Tabular Editor actually goes back to before Power BI Desktop sort of became mainstream, back in the days of analysis services, so SQL Server analysis services. Developers of SQL Server analysis services models have been using Tabular Editor for 4 or 5 years almost now. For these kind of models, at this point, people are sort of using Tabular Editor for everything. So both for importing new tables, for modeling and creating the relationships between the tables, writing all of the DAX code, both for measures and calculated columns, calculated tables, and so on. And that's all good and nice. But one thing you just have to be aware about when you're using an external tool with Power BI Desktop is that there are a few limitations to the kind of write operations, so the kind of data modeling operations you can make from external tools. So you are free to read any data from the model and any metadata, but there are limitations to what metadata operations you can write to the data model. And that's all documented on Microsoft's site. So if you Google something like Power BI external tools, then one of the first hits here will be a description of how to use this external tools feature, how to create your own tools. And then on this section where it says data modeling operations, right here, you see that they're highlighting some supported write operations and some data modeling limitations. And these sort of list what restrictions you have when you're using an external tool to make changes to your Power BI data model. So in this case, what you just should be aware about is that you can use external tools for defining and editing measures, calculation groups, perspectives, metadata translations, row level security, and object level security. Anything else, so tables, columns, relationships, is actually unsupported. So even though some external tools might let you make these kind of changes to your model, you should be aware that they are not supported by Microsoft. And so what that means is that even though you can make these changes, and it may also work in most of the times, there is a risk that sometimes it won't work and that it may even break your Pbix file so that you can no longer load it. So just keep this in mind. For Tabular Editor, by default, when you install Tabular Editor, it will not let you make any changes that are not on this list of supported operations. But there's actually a setting here that you can override this behavior. So if you feel like you want to experiment with it, then you just check this box here, allow unsupported Power BI features, and Tabular Editor will let you make any change you can think of to the tabular data model of your report. So use this with care. As I said, by default, this is disabled, so you won't be able to make a change that is not supported by Power BI Desktop. But sometimes, yeah, you feel like, hey, I would like to maybe, I don't know, add a description to a column or something. So even though it's officially not supported, it actually does work. And even stuff like putting a column into a display folder through an external tool, some of these minor changes that do not really impact the semantics, the business logic of the model, usually work fine. But again, there are no guarantees. So, okay, so with that out of the way, as I said, the main point of Tabular Editor is for working with the data model. So one question I also get a lot is it possible to use Tabular Editor when you have a report that is in a live connect mode? And the answer to that is unfortunately no, because if your report is in live connect, sometimes you also call it a thin report. Well, that basically means that the report itself, the Pbix file, does not have a data model built inside of it. It's just connecting to a data model that resides somewhere else. So for example, in the Power BI service, or maybe it's connecting to an instance of analysis services. And so in that case, since there's no data model locally in the report, then there's nothing for the external tool to connect to. And so in that case, you won't be able to use Tabular Editor. So, what you see here on the screen is the open source version of Tabular Editor. You can also tell by the version number. Any version of Tabular Editor that starts with the number 2 is the open source or free version of Tabular Editor. And the paid, the commercial version is called Tabular Editor 3. So the basic idea between these two tools is exactly the same. You get a nice overview of all of the model objects in your model, all of the tables, and below each table you can view all of the measures. And it's very easy to switch back and forth, and any change you make to a measure. So if, for example, I decide I want to multiply this value by 3 by editing the Dax expression, there's no downtime at all, because all of the changes you make are only made locally in Tabular Editor until you hit the save button. So that's sort of the basic idea of why you would want to use Tabular Editor, is because it's a lot faster to make these sort of small incremental changes all over your data model. And then once you're ready to actually see the effect of these changes, that's when you hit the save button. And at that point, you will see the report in a Power BI refresh to reflect the new figures, the new calculations that you have made. Contrast this to how it works inside of Power BI Desktop, where you would have to locate the measure that you want to change, bring it up into the formula bar, and then you start typing something, and then you forget what it was you wanted to type, or you want to just check out the code on some of the other objects. And so you swap over to one of the other measure, and you get the little working on it spinner, and something breaks because you didn't actually finish typing the Dax expression and so on. And so you go back, and it's just, at least for a large, reasonably complex data model with a couple of 100 measures, which is not unusual in the real world, this just starts to get, like, I would say, not the optimal experience. And that's sort of the pain point that Tabular Editor tries to address, in that it lets you make all of these metadata changes completely offline. And then once you are ready to actually commit and see the effect of the changes you made, well, that's when you hit the save button, and then you can switch back over to Power BI Desktop to view the effects of that. So that's the basic idea. So I cannot see the chat window right now. So Michael, if you could, if there are any questions to the topic at hand, please just interrupt me and let me know, and I'm happy to take any questions along the way.
Will do. Glad to do that. Okay,
sounds good. As I said before, Tabular Editor basically lets you edit any object in the model metadata and any object property, and you can even do stuff like multi-select. For example, if you wanted to apply a display folder to multiple objects at once. So let's create a new display folder here. Let's call it test. And we can even, drag and drop objects around to move them into the display folder. And we can even do stuff like copy and paste. So creating multiple copies of the measures I selected. And if we make a mistake along the way, we can undo, and we can undo all the way back to the way the model looked originally. And these are sort of the basic operations. You can do exactly the same thing in the commercial version of Tabular Editor. And in a second, I'll show you what else is in the commercial version. But just keep in mind that the idea here is to be able to make many changes, multiple changes all over the data model in the quickest possible way without having to wait for the notorious working on it spinner all the time.
Daniel, there was one question about, can you view the data in the results in Tabular Editor?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So the answer is, in the free version that you see here, we don't have any way to actually view the data in the model. And the reason for that is that this version of Tabular Editor was designed purely for offline metadata changes in mind. So when this was originally created for analysis services, I figured that all I needed this tool for was to be able to load a so-called model.bim file. So this was before we started to have support for Power BI Desktop. You would have all of your tabular model metadata defined in this model.bim file. And then we just wanted a quick way to load a file, view all of the tables and measures, make changes, and save those back to the file. So no interactions with data of any kind. So no refreshing of tables, no interactive Dax queries or anything like that. But that's one of the main points actually of Tabular Editor 3, is that it allows you to do all of that. So in a second, I'll switch over to Tabular Editor 3 and you'll see some of the options that it brings to the table for interactively working with the data of the model and not just the metadata. Was there another question, or?
That was the only one so far. It looks like we just got another. What is the biggest advantage of the premium version?
Okay, yeah. In fact, let's switch over to that because I think I sort of, but at this point you should have a great idea of the basic features of both tools and understand why it could be advantageous to use Tabular Editor. So let's head over to the premium version, the commercial Tabular Editor 3. So once again, I'm just launching it here from inside of Power BI Desktop, because that way it will be immediately connected to my Power BI report file. So the first thing you will notice here is that the user interface is pretty different. There is actually an option here on the window tab to have it look just like the old version, or at least have the windows, the tool windows placed in a way that it sort of looks like the free version, if you prefer that. But the point here is that it's completely customizable. So if you prefer to look at the interface in a different way, you can set it up any way you like. And also it has support for multiple monitors. Now, of course, that's a little difficult to show here while I'm just sharing a single screen, but you could easily imagine if you are working on this model and you wanted a preview of the data in the customer table, for example, and you want to drag this over to another monitor, you just do like this, and you can move it over here to the right or wherever you have your monitor. So you can basically configure your workspace to look however you prefer. And already here, this is one of the interactive features I talked about, where we can actually browse the data in the model. In this case, it's just a table preview with infinite scrolling, where we can scroll through the tables in the model. So in contrast to Power BI Desktop, where we can only do this for a single table at a time, here we can do it for all of the tables. If we want that, they'll just appear as different tabs. We can, just relocate one of them if we wanted to compare something across two tables. That's no big deal. And we can apply, the usual stuff like filtering, sorting, all of that stuff. And one interesting thing to note, that this even works if your model is in direct query mode. So if you created a direct query model in Power BI and you browse it using Tabular Editor 3, then you will actually be able to preview the tables in the same way as what I'm doing here. Another one of the interactive features that we have is by clicking on the toolbar here, you can see there's a button that lets you create a new DAX query. So for those of you who are used to working with DAX Studio, well, now with Tabular Editor 3, you can write your queries directly inside Tabular Editor. Some of the advantages of doing that is that you gain the benefit of the Dax Semantic Analyzer, which ships with the paid version of Tabular Editor. And this is the semantic analyzer that is responsible for things like intelligence. So when I start to type something, it provides me with suggestions, and it knows everything about the data in my model. So once I start to type something, so let's say customer, and we start to type, and it knows everything about the row context and so on. And yeah, all of the semantics that goes into typing DAX, and it provides you with all of these code assist features. You can also see here the little tooltip at the top here shows you that now we are on the third argument of the add columns function, and it expects us to type an expression. And that expression is one that will be evaluated in the row context of the current table. So it gives you these kinds of little hints to make it easier to write your DAX code. And that in itself, for most people, I think is actually good enough reason to upgrade to the paid version. You can also do things like, let's say I have multiple evaluate statements here. So another one I have could be the association table, whatever. You hit a 5 and you get both of them, but you can even do stuff like, let's say we define a variable up here at the top of the screen. And then for some reason we, I don't know, we just bring that variable in here. Well, then you can even do stuff like, so now I'm executing both of these evaluate statements and I get 2 results. But if I just select this evaluate statement here and I hit Shift F5, then Tabular Editor will only evaluate that, even though it actually references a variable that was defined up here. Oh, and maybe I wanted to rename this variable. Well, I can just right-click and choose the rename variable option, and it'll highlight all occurrences of this variable. So I can just type a different name, like better variable name, something like that, and it'll change it. And this this knows everything about variable scope and so on. So it'll just it won't just do a simple search and replace within the DAX code, but it'll actually find actual references to this variable, and not just strings or other things that just happen to have the same name. Other stuff we can do, like if we have a complex, more complex DAX expression than this, we can right-click. We can do stuff like peak definition to find, okay, what was the definition of this object? This also works for measures. So if we add a measure to this guy here, so let's just take this measure, for example, and we forgot what the definition of this measure was. Well, we right-click, we choose peak definition, and there we go. So it has a lot of these nice coding productivity features that if any of you are used to writing code in tools like Visual Studio, or VS Code, where it has a lot of intelligence features going on. This is sort of the thing that we wanted to replicate here, to give you the same sort of productivity options here for quickly typing code, giving you as much assistance as possible as you're writing the DAX code. And this, of course, works not only for querying the model, but also for editing the DAX expressions already in the model. So you can do that in the same way as you did with the free version of Tabulated. So just by finding the measure or the calculated column you want to edit, and then just type in the expression. But actually, there's a better way in Tabulated 3 where you can work with several DAX expressions or several objects in a single script. And the way to use that is that you right-click on a table, or you select a number of measures that you want to edit, and then choose this script DAX option. And that will generate a document that holds all of these objects and their DAX expressions. And actually, it not only does it hold the DAX expressions of these objects, but also various other properties like format string and description. So let's say I want to add some documentation to this guy. I can type description and then type something like this calculates the total net sales. And then once I hit the little apply button here, then this description actually gets added back to this measure. And so when I save the model back to Power BI Desktop, it'll show up as a tooltip. So if any of you guys have worked back in the good old days with something called Analysis Services multidimensional model, back then we had something called the MDX script that allowed us to define all of our calculated measures within a single script. And this was sort of the same sort of feature that I wanted to aim for here, because I just feel more productive when I can easily browse all the code that I need, and especially if I have a complex interrelationships between the model that I want to explore and work with. And speaking of interdependencies between the models, there's of course also the show dependencies view, which I should say also exists in the free version of Tabular Editor. So if you want to know which objects depends on what, then this view is definitely for you. Again, this also works in the paid version. So if that's all you need, then go for the free version.
Daniel, the questions have been coming in, but
yeah.
So whenever you're at a good point, I can ask those.
Let me just show one last feature here, and then I'll take some questions. So I showed you already that we can create DAX queries, but we can actually also use this pivot grid feature. If we don't want to create a DAX query for looking at the data in the model, then we have this other option here, which creates this grid, which looks a little like the pivot table in Excel. So here, for example, if we drag in some of our measures, let's expand this a little bit and let's slice this by, let's find something that is related to this category, maybe, I don't know. Yeah, so we can interactively explore the model. And the thing I want to show you here is if we interactively change the expression here, so let's say we multiply this by pi, and let's say just for fun, we want to change the formatting of this a little bit. And then we hit the apply and sync button. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to save these metadata changes back to the data model and then save it back to Power BI Desktop. Then you will see that the pivot grid immediately updates to reflect the changes we made. So this makes it much easier to test and debug your code. You don't even have to switch back to Power BI Desktop anymore. You can do it all from in here. Make sure that your measures provide the correct results, and then worry about visualization in Power BI later. Okay, let's go with some questions.
All right, this first question came in when you were renaming the variables, and Jennifer asked, is there a way to rename all options but one, or do you have to do one at a time in that case? I think it's when she asked that when you selected both of the variables.
Yeah, so the cool thing is that the editor automatically selects all occurrences of the variable. So let me give you a slightly better example here. If I create a new calculated table on this model, and in order to do that, I just have to allow unsupported modeling operations. This was the same thing I talked about earlier, because by default, you will not be allowed to add calculated tables to a Power BI Desktop model. So now let me add a calculated table here. And this is called advanced state table. And for this calculated table, I have a huge DAX expression that I'm going to paste in. And this is the infamous Marco Russo date pattern, which is 65 kilobytes of DAX code. Let me just copy it here from Notepad and paste it into Tabular Editor. You can see this is a whopping 1,500 lines of DAX code in this model, which we just added to this calculated table, and immediately Tabular Editor knows what the columns that result from this humongous DAX expressions are and what their data types are. So if we go into the DAX expression here, and you can see there's a ton of variables all over the place in this expression. If I go to one of them, any one of them that I want to rename, so let's say I want to rename current holiday date. Let's go with other holidays, actually, the other holidays variable that we have here. All I have to do is right-click and choose rename variable, and Tabular Editor will automatically select all occurrences of this particular variable so that I can give it whatever name I want, and it's edited simultaneously. So I cannot make a mistake. Whereas if I do not do this rename variable option, but I just start to change the name, then you'll see I'll get a syntax error here. And Tabular Editor even tells me exactly where my error is. I don't have to, like, I believe in the formula bar in Power BI Desktop, it'll just tell you that there's an error, but it will not necessarily tell you where that error is. And even if you have multiple errors scattered across your DAX expression, Tabulated Editor will tell you all about those. So hopefully that answers the question.
Just let us know if it didn't. Jennifer, another one was, can you select and replace multiple column names at the same time? I know you showed an example of measures. You updated multiple DAX in a script. This question talks about column names. So I don't know if that's different.
Right, and that's a very good question, especially because this is actually one of the features that have that are still on the backlog for the paid version of Tabulated, but which actually does exist in the free version. So let me just quickly show you what the intention is, and this is coming to the free version also very shortly. So if, for example, I go into one of my tables here where I have a bunch of columns and I want to make a rename across several columns at once, well, all I have to do basically is select the columns I want to rename, right click and choose the batch rename option, or I can even just hit the F2 button. And when I do that, it brings up this little batch rename dialog where I can find a word or any expression basically in the column name in order to replace that with something else. So if I wanted to get rid of product and I want to name this, I don't know, item or something instead, I can do that. And I can even use regular expressions for those of you who are familiar with that. Hit OK, and then Tabulated Editor will rename all of these columns in one go. This feature does not yet exist in the paid version of Tabulated, so unfortunately that was an oversight on my part. So here we don't have the batch rename option, but it is coming and will be, I would say, within a week or so. So this is just bad timing that you're asking this question right now. But yeah, this is an option.
Well, I feel like that's a good answer. He did clarify he was asking about columns within a measure. Can you rename columns within a measure?
Right, I gotcha. So actually, I was working at this at some point, but I actually don't remember whether I finalized that. So let's just try and add a column to this table called, I don't know, product returns. And then outside of that, let's do a SumX, where we just sum up the product returns other. And here we should probably rename this to avoid clashing with the measure name. And then it has to be a table expression. There we go. So what you're asking here, so in this case, I'm adding a column to product, calling it underscore product returns other. And the question was, I believe, whether it's possible to rename that. No. Oh, yeah. Hang on a second. What's this? Rename extension column? There's so many features in this tool, I sometimes forget what's possible. Oh, it doesn't work. Okay, that's a bug, but the intention is that it should work. So I will just take a note of that. Yeah, you see that I can do it for the name up here, where it actually selects the name, but it doesn't update the reference down here. But the intention is that it was supposed to work, but unfortunately it doesn't. I'll make sure that gets fixed as well.
Nice. Do we want to keep doing questions? Or
yeah, by all means.
I don't want to. Okay.
Yeah.
Someone asked, is there a way to export the measure dependency info?
Good question. So if we take one of these measures, well, there are ways for sure. I'm just looking for the easiest way. So I believe in the open source version of Tabulated, so there actually was an option to copy that, but here it doesn't really work. Let me just try in the free version just to see if there's any difference. So let's go to my Power BI model here. Let's find the same measure, show dependencies, and then I just click. Yeah, here we have two options that also didn't make it into the paid version. I'll make sure that gets fixed as well. We have one option to copy the tree as a JSON, which would look like this, and another option which copies it as just plain text, which looks like this. So I don't know if that's what you're asking for, but actually there's a better way if you are looking for exporting all of the dependencies across all objects, which is to use the scripting feature of Tabulated, so the C# scripting. This feature is also available in the free version of Tabulated, where if you're familiar with C#, you can write some code and basically programmatically do whatever you want to the data model. If you're not familiar with C#, we have on our documentation page lots of examples on how to use this. So if you go to docs.tabulated.com, and again, this works in both versions, so both the free and the paid version. And you go to the useful script snippets article, there are plenty of examples to go from. For example, here's a script that automatically creates measures based on the currently selected columns. But the one in question here is generating documentation. Yeah, this one, for example, exporting dependencies between tables and measures. So if we just copy all of this code, bring it over to a Tabular Editor, and we run this, it generates a nice dependency tree of all of the measures in this case, and which tables that they depend on. But this script can easily be adjusted if you wanted it to output all of the dependencies between all of the measures of the model, for example. There are various ways. It kind of depends on how you want the output to look like. But again, since this is a C# script, you could basically create anything and have it output the data in whatever way you need.
That's great. And here's somebody who I think is sold. They asked, how much does Tabular Editor 3 cost? But I think you'll probably get to that at the end, right?
Let's just go to it right now, because it's pretty briefly to go over. So we have 3 editions of Tabular Editor 3, which is the desktop edition, the business edition, and the enterprise edition. Here you see the prices by prices per month, $10, $35, and $95 per month, respectively. The difference between these editions is that the desktop edition, the cheap one here, only allows you to work to use Tabular Editor 3 as an external tool for Power BI Desktop. So basically, everything that I've showed you in the demo so far would be possible with that version. If you need to use Tabular Editor in order to connect to the Power BI service XMLA endpoint, then you would need the business or the enterprise edition, depending on your basically how much engagement you have with Microsoft. If you're only using Power BI Premium per user, then the business edition would suffice. But if you're using Power BI Premium capacity, so if you have a P1, P2, whatever in your organization, and you want to connect to the XMLA endpoint of that, then you need the enterprise edition of Tabular Editor 3. And the same goes if you're using SQL Server analysis services or Azure analysis services, then you would also need either the business or the enterprise edition based on which tier of analysis services your organization is using. Did we have more questions?
That's it. I have a question about the licensing. So I work on local and then multiple VMs in different organizations. Does one license, can I install at different places, or do I need to get an additional license per machine?
Yeah, good question. So by default, we limit the number of installations you can have, so that the desktop edition is limited to just one machine, and the same goes for the business edition, whereas the enterprise edition allows for up to 3 installations.
Got it.
But if you're working as a consultant, we have other options available, so please inquire in that case. Okay, great.
That's all the questions we got so far, but I'll keep an eye out for more.
Okay, cool.
Daniel, there was a question I had, which was, is it possible to take the DAX scripting sort of in mass and move that from one model to another? Say, for example, if you were migrating changes from a dev to a test to a production environment.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, there are different options available for doing that with Tabular Editor. So first of all, you are completely free to just copy the DAX script itself and paste it into another model. So let me just try to spin up a new instance of Tabular Editor here. And let's say that I just connect to a completely unrelated model that I happen to have on my local machine. So I can just create a new Dax script, so an empty script basically, and paste in the code. And so here it's going to complain that it can't create this measure because there's no table in my model called analysis Dax. So of course you need to make sure that the objects that your measures rely on actually exist in both models. Otherwise, it doesn't really make any sense. Yeah, and this, of course, since I was using a completely different model. But otherwise, if this had been the same model, or at least a model with the same basic structure, with the same tables and the same columns, then I wouldn't have any issue in just copying this in here and then executing the script, and then it would apply all the changes to the local model. Now, in this case, it does tell me that there are no changes because now this is the same model as where these measures came from. Another option is to simply copy the object. So let's say I wanted to add this table and all of the measures on this table to another model. What I could do then is to simply hit the copy button. So if I hit copy here, it'll actually, in my clipboard, it'll insert a definition of the table itself in this JSON format of the table and all of its, on all of the objects below the table. So in this case, all of the measures and columns and so on. And once it's in my clipboard, I can actually use this to, let's say I connect to a different model now, go back to my AdventureWorks model. So I can actually paste this here. So just by hitting paste, you see it actually creates this table and it creates all of the measures. Of course, now I get a ton of errors here because again, these measures depend on a sales table which doesn't exist in this model. But the principle is the same, assuming you have two versions of the model which are kind of close to each other, but there are maybe some slight differences. Then it's simply a matter of having two instances of Tabular Editor running and then copying over objects from one to the other. You can do multi-select and copy within the same model or between models. That's completely up to you. Of course, there's also other options available outside of Tabular Editor. I mentioned one of the other tools initially called Alm Toolkit. If you often have this requirement of migrating model changes from one environment to another, I strongly recommend you look into this tool. It's a free tool and it's very, very useful for doing these kind of incremental model deployments.
Daniel, if I wanted to copy a calculated column from a table in one model to a table in another model, would I need to process a refresh of that destination model, and can I do that from within Tabular Editor 3?
Yeah, great question. So again, keep in mind that making changes to columns, and in particular calculated columns, is not supported by Power BI Desktop. So even though it actually might work, you always risk you always run the risk of actually breaking the Pbix, since it's one of the unsupported operations of Power BI Desktop. But you can actually do that. So let's say we add, so here, for example, we added this advanced date table to our model earlier. So this is a calculated table with this humongous Dax expression. And initially, if we just try to preview the data in the table, it's going to be empty. But we should be able to actually refresh this table by right-clicking and choosing Refresh Calculate. And then it should, oh, we get an error here. And I believe this is because, yeah, this is probably because since we're connected to Power BI Desktop, it just doesn't work. So let me give you another example where I connect to an instance of analysis services, or you know what, let's connect to the Power BI endpoint instead. So here I have the Power BI XMLA endpoint, and I connect with my my user account. Yeah, here we go. And we just open one of these data sets. Let's just take this one. And we're just waiting for it to load. Yeah, here we go. So now I'm connected to a Power BI dataset, which has already been published to the Power BI service. And so in this case, if I add, for example, you said a calculated column. So let's add a calculated column to the customer table. So now we have, let's see if we have a smaller table, this one, for example. So this table, this is a bad example because it doesn't have any data. Okay, let me create this calculated table once again. Date table, and let's add the huge Dax expression that we saw earlier. And we save the model to the service. And now we can preview the data in this table, but since it hasn't been calculated, and you see we even get a little warning here saying the calculated table does not hold any rows because it needs to be refreshed. Well, we can either just right click and choose the refresh option from here, or there's even a calculate table button up here. So if we just click this is going to start a refresh, which runs in the background in the Power BI service. And once that refresh completes, we should be able to see the data in the table. So usually this should take, I don't know, 3-4 seconds. And here we go. So now we see the data. And of course, the same thing applies if we then wanted to add or modify a calculated column on this table. So let's add a calculated column called test, and let's just set let's just set the Dax expression on this table. On this column to 1 to 3. So when we refresh the table or refresh the table preview, we'll see that we probably need to close it and reopen the preview. So now we see that the column that we added. So why can't I find this column? That's because I didn't save my changes. I need to remember, and it actually tells me at the top of the screen. So we saw this little this yellow box here at the top of the screen saying that I have made structural changes to the model metadata, which have not yet been synchronized to analysis services. So basically what that means is that I made some changes to the model locally in Tabular Editor, but I didn't yet save these changes to analysis services. So hitting save, and we should now see that the new column has been added. But right now you can see that it just says calculation needed. And that's because we need to do a refresh of the table in order to populate this with values. So clicking the little calculate table button up here and waiting for the refresh to complete, which should take a couple of seconds. It gets refreshed, and now we see the data in the column. So all of that is possible to do from within Tabular Editor, but just keep in mind there are some limitations when you're working against Power BI Desktop, again, because some of these operations are not supported by Power BI Desktop. Hopefully that will change in the future. Okay, so question to you guys, how much time do we have?
You've got 28 minutes left, but feel free to take as little or as much, since we're virtual,
okay, cool.
Of that you want.
Yeah. So another feature of Tabular Editor, since we're now connected to the Power BI XML endpoint, then we don't have any limitations in terms of which modeling operations we can make. So we can use this to import new tables, define relationships between the tables, and so on. All of that works once you're no longer connected to desktop, but to any other instance of analysis services. So one of the other buttons that we have up here is the diagram view. So we can create a new diagram. And once we have that, we can drag a table in from the TOM Explorer. We can right click and choose to add all of the related tables. And then of course we can auto arrange the diagram. So we can start to get an idea for how the tables are related, even edit the relationship. If we wanted to, for example, make this relationship bidirectional, we can do that. It'll show us what it looks like visually. So it makes it a lot easier to sort of, if you're doing all of your modeling in Power BI Desktop, then of course you'll need this diagram view just for defining new relationships between models or editing existing relationships and so on. And you're not limited to just having one diagram. Of course, you can create as many of these diagram views as you want, and just adding the necessary tables to each diagram. Now this is kind of a small model, so there's not really any point in having multiple diagrams. But imagine you had a huge model with I don't know, hundreds of tables and so on, then it's pretty nice to be able to start from a fact table, for example, and then just view which dimensions are related to that fact. So let me give you another example. If I load my trusty old AdventureWorks model and create a new diagram, and we add the internet sales table to that diagram. And then we choose, so we have actually multiple options here. We can choose to add all related tables or all tables that filter this table. So that option is actually interesting because that will give us not only those tables that are directly related, but also any snowflakes that we may have. So here's our internet sales, and here it shows product subcategory, and product category. So this is a pretty good idea if you're working on someone else's model and you want to get an overview of how the tables are related to one another. Then this tool is actually very helpful just for doing that.
Is this diagram metadata stored in Tabular Editor, or does it get written back to the Pbix or analysis services?
So actually, it's not stored anywhere unless
Okay.
you explicitly save the diagram, and in that case, it just saves it as a standalone file.
Mm-hmm.
I have yet to find a good way to sort of integrate the diagram with the model itself.
Mm-hmm.
So if you spend a lot of time working on a diagram for a particular model and you meticulously put the tables in various positions to make it look good, then of course you should save this file, put it somewhere next to the Pbix file perhaps. And then the next time you open the model, you simply just load the diagram file. In fact, let me just demonstrate it right now. If I save this here, and just for illustrative purposes, let's just put this way off to the side here. Let's zoom out a little bit. So let's save this, close it, and then we simply reopen it. And it'll look exactly the same way as it did when we loaded it. And actually, interestingly, you can load this diagram even if you're not connected to the same model. In that case, it's just going to search for any tables that have the same name as those that were in the initial model. So let's say you have a development environment and you have a similar model on the test or production environments, then you can actually create the diagram against the development environment, save it as a file, connect to the test or production environment, and then load the diagram file, and it should look more or less the same way.
Very cool.
But so this doesn't push changes back to the service, though. It doesn't update table relationships, though, right?
No, not unless you make changes to the relationship. So in case you delete a relationship or add a new one or change the directionality of the relationships, then it's basically just a tool to look at the relationships between the tables. So in other words, it works completely fine against the Power BI desktop model. It's only doing stuff like modifying the relationships or deleting a table or whatever at the model level, which would actually cause changes and which might not be supported when you're working against Power BI desktop. The diagram file itself, this file format, the T3 diag file, is actually just a very, very simple file format, which is a JSON-based format. So now, of course, it's not formatted, but let me just open it in this JSON editor so we can see what it looks like if you're interested. So this is just a very simple format, which basically just, you can see we have the diagram itself, and then the diagram can have a number of pages. In this case, we just use a single page. And then on each page, you have a definition of which tables are shown on the page and where they are located. So it's actually a very, very simple format. And then when Tabular Editor loads this diagram, it detects which relationships exist between the tables, and then it just lays things out, and yeah, you get what you see here on the screen.
Very cool.
Let's see. Another interesting feature of Tabular Editor is the best practice analyzer, and this feature exists in both the free and the paid version as well. So the best practice analyzer allows you to define a number of rules, best practice rules, or you can use some of the rules that Microsoft have published for best data modeling practices. And then it continuously scans your model, and it even shows you down here at the bottom of the screen if you have any of these best practice issues. You click this button and it brings you over to the best practice analyzer view. You can bring this up into a separate tool window if you prefer, put it on another monitor. And these could be all kinds of things, whatever we can infer just from looking at the model metadata. So for example, here's something about hiding fact table columns. And this is typically because best practices dictate that you should always create explicit measures for your for your numeric data in your model. So if you have something like sales amount and you want users to visualize sales amount on a chart, for example, then you should always create an explicit measure with a Dax expression where you sum the sales amount column instead of displaying or having the numeric column visible in the model. So the best practice in this case would be to generate to create a measure and then hide this column. And there are various reasons for that. I don't want to go into them now, but you can imagine there are all kinds of these rules that you can apply. Another one here is do not summarize numeric columns. So if you have something like days to manufacture, which is something that the end user shouldn't summarize this column in a report. They shouldn't aggregate the values in this column. Instead, they should use this column as a slicer. Well, in that case, it's a good idea to set the summarize by property to something other than sum. For example, set it to none, because that will prevent the end user from accidentally summing a column that is not intended to be summed. And so all of these rules can help you sort of build better quality models, and Tabular Editor will sort of instruct you what to do. In some cases, Tabular Editor can even fix the issue for you. So for example, for this particular rule, do not summarize numeric columns, we can have Tabular Editor either generate a fix script where it just creates the C# script that would be used to fix this issue. So you can review it before you execute it, or you can just apply the fix directly. So in this case, it's just a matter of setting the summarize by property to none on these columns, and then they're going to disappear. So yeah, definitely take a look at that. If you Google Power BI best practices, then I believe one of the first hits will be this blog post created by Michael Kowalski, where he links to a GitHub repository he created with a ton of these best practice rules, which are sort of regarded the de facto standard for best practices when creating Power BI models. So definitely take a look at this. You will need Tabular Editor, either the free version or the paid version, in order to implement these rules. Questions at this point?
We did have a question about, can you create a Power BI model out of an analysis services, or the other way using Tabular Editor?
That's a good question. Now there's no like built-in feature where there's no button you can simply press that says convert to Power BI or convert to analysis services. And the reason for that is that it's actually quite complicated process, because there are some differences in the model metadata, and specifically in the way that data sources are treated. So the model I'm connected to right now, for example, is a SQL Server analysis services model, and this model holds an explicit data source. So you can see here I have this data source called SQL Server localhost, and this contains the connection string to my SQL Server database, and then all of the partitions on this model. So each partition on each table holds a SQL expression. So like select star from some table on the SQL database, and this is the partition query that is going to populate the table with data when it gets refreshed. Now, for a Power BI model, this works in a different way. So let me switch over to let me connect to my Power BI model here again. And then you see that now, first of all, there's no explicit data sources on this model. Instead, all of the data are actually defined inline as as M expressions, Power Query expressions on every partition table. So at the very at a minimum, you would need some way to convert your data sources from one type to the other to make it work. That you can probably find some good blog posts about that if you search online. But the answer is there's no built-in feature in Tabulated to do this.
Got it. By the way, a few of the question askers said, the guy who asked about the dependency said, that's exactly what I needed, thank you. And then Jennifer said, this is very informative, thank you. So I just wanted to pass that along since you weren't looking at the chat.
Yeah, thanks. Are there any more questions at this point? I still have a few more things I'd like to show.
There was one question about any plans to add documentation as a feature. I'm not sure specifically what that's about, but
so again, this is some of the stuff where I prefer to point people towards the scripting solutions, because if you just ask me to create documentation, I mean, there's 100 ways you could create documentation on a model. So I don't want to force a certain standard on people. So instead, I would like to point out that you can use the scripting engine to generate the documentation and then do whatever you want with it. So for example, if you run this script, then it's going to create a list of all, I believe in this case, it's going to create a list of all the measures in my model, actually all measures and all columns. And then it's going to export all of their names, object types, descriptions, format strings, data types, expressions, and so on. And it's going to save all that as a TSV file. So let me just, let me just explicitly specify where I wanted to store this file. And then we run this script, and then we just generated a file on disk here called documentation TSV. So this is a tab separated file. So if I open that in Excel, so here's my documentation basically. So a list of all of the measures and columns in my model, complete with all of the format strings, data types, Dax expressions, and so on. So if this is the kind of documentation you're looking for, you could probably take this over to load this file in Power BI Desktop or something if you wanted to look a little nicer. Or you could adjust this script to generate HTML or whatever you would like for your documentation. The point here is that you can use the scripting engine to browse, to iterate through all of the objects of the tabular model and then do whatever you'd like to those.
That's awesome.
And speaking of, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say you can keep going.
Yeah, okay. So speaking of scripting, we saw earlier we had this best practice rule about that we should probably create explicit measures for our columns. Let's see if we can locate that again. And actually, I think this is probably a bad example since this model already has these explicit measures. But just to show you the power of the scripting engine here, let's take this example here where we are creating measures from columns. So I just copy this script, I bring it over to Tabular Editor, and again, scripting is also possible with the free version of Tabular Editor. So what this script does, let me see if I can zoom in a little bit here. I'm actually missing like it's a zoom. So don't be afraid of this code. I know it might look a little intimidating if you're new to C#, but basically what this script is going to do, it's going to loop through all of the currently selected columns. And then for each of these columns, it's going to add a new measure to the model. And that measure is going to be called sum of, and then the name of the column. And then the Dax expression on the measure is going to be sum, and then a parenthesis. And then this Dax object full name, which is sort of the Dax way of referencing the specific column. It's going to set the format string, it's going to set the description, and at the end, it's also going to hide the column I selected. So the idea here is that if I select a number of columns here in my table, and I can multi-select by holding down the control key, so extended amount, freight, gross profit, sales amount, tax amount, then I can have all of these measures generated automatically just by running this script. There we go. And now we see we instantly got these 6 new measures each of them having the DAX expression corresponding to the column that was selected. And not only that, we can take it one step further. Let's say we wanted to create time intelligence measures. So we wanted to create a year-to-date version, a month-to-date, year-over-year, and so forth. So we have another script for that. Pull that script in here. You just need to make sure that here at the top of the script, there's a reference to a column, which should be the date column of our model, and that looks good. So now I've just selected these 6 measures. In fact, let's move these measures over to another table just to not confuse them with the other measures on the model. So let's just, I don't know, let's just create a dummy table here. And let's paste the measures in here. So now we just select these 6 tables, and what this script is going to do is it's going to create 6 new versions of each of these measures. One for the year-to-date calculation, one for previous year, year-over-year, and so forth. So let's run the script. And there we go. So in a matter of seconds, we just instantly generated, 36 new measures or something like that, with each having the DAX expression for the respective calculation that the measure performs. So I don't even want to think about how long it would take me to create all of these measures by hand in Power BI Desktop. One other thing about scripting is that if you happen to create a script that you like and that you find yourself using a lot of times, then you can actually save the script as something called a macro. So if you hit the little save as macro button here, we can give the macro a name. So I'll name it demo and write / Nashville. And we just select what types of objects the script applies to. So in this case, we want the user to select a number of measures before running the script. So we just make sure that measures are checked and we hit OK. And the next thing that happens is that the next time I want to run this script, I can even close the script editor. I don't need that anymore. I can just select the measures that I want to have this script executed for, right click, and here you see now we have this Nashville option integrated directly into the UI, so you can probably already guess where this is going. If I click this, I get my time intelligence measures generated for all of the measures that I had selected. If I made a mistake, of course, I can just undo this to get the model looking the way it was before I executed the script. You can find all the macros that you create this way here on the macro tab, where you can also edit them and take a look at how they were implemented. So this is a nice way if you want to sort of extend the user interface of Tabulated with your own features. And you're not limited to having to executing the script through the context menu. You can actually go to the tools customize tab here, and then under commands there's a menu option here called macros, where you can find all of the macros that you have created, and this allows you to drag an action directly into the toolbar or any toolbar basically. So if you wanted to have this button placed here, so for now. Anytime I launch Tabulated, I will always have the little Nashville button here. And whenever I click this button, it'll create the time intelligence measures for me. So this way, the Tabulated is highly customizable, and you can quickly create these scripts to really improve your productivity, having sort of the features that you use the most often, wherever you need them.
So we got a question, where can we find these scripts? Is there any page or videos with explanations on how they work? And is it possible to do it in both versions of Tabular Editor?
Yeah, so everything I showed you here regarding scripting and also saving the scripts as macros is possible in both the free and the paid version. And this was actually one of the very first features that made it into the free version. So that's why it's like it's been there forever. So the scripting language itself is pretty robust. It's well tested. People have been using this for several years now, and you can find all of the documentation. So if you go to docs.tabulated.com, maybe I should share the link in the chat. First of all, there's an article that sort of introduces advanced scripting, as it's also called. This is a good read if you just want to get an overview of how it works, how to type the code and so on. Some of the stuff I showed you. I don't know if I can somehow. Can I open the chat? Yeah. So this is one link that is good to have, and the other one is this called Useful Script Snippets, which is just sort of a curated list of some of the scripts that I find myself using most of the times. But again, just Google something like Tabulated script, and you can already find there's a huge community of people who have created lots of powerful scripts that you can find out there on the big internet. But yeah, that's definitely a productivity boosting feature. And again, you don't need the paid version of Tabulated to be able to use this. Right. I think that more or less covers the most interesting new features. There is one last feature that I would also like to show, but this is probably most interesting for people who are already familiar with the free version of Tabular Editor. In that the new version of Tabular Editor allows us so one limitation we had in the free version of Tabular Editor was regarding importing tables. So if I go to the free version of Tabular Editor, I can and I connect to some model. Then the free version actually allows us to import tables from a data source. So in this case, I have my SQL Server data source from which I can import tables, and it will show me a list of all of the tables and views on the SQL Server data source. And I can select whichever tables I would like to add to my data model, and hit the import button, and Tabular Editor then creates the table and maps all of the columns to the source. That's all very nice. It can also show a difference. So if any of the columns in the source have changed, for example, if there are new columns or some of the columns have changed their data type, then it can sort of bring me this information, and I can decide if I want to update the model based on this information. The limitation about this, however, is that it only works for these kinds of data sources that uses the SQL expression. So it doesn't work for the Power Query data sources that we normally use with Power BI. But that is something that has changed with the paid version, which now also supports Power Query partitions. So just as an example, let me create a new table on this model here. And name it train, and then I'm pasting in an M expression, and let me just zoom in a little bit so you can better see what's going on. So this is just an M expression which loads a file called train.parquet from an Azure blob storage, which of course this is an M expression, so it's a Power Query expression. Which is something that is not supported by the free version of Tabular Editor. It can only sort of use the SQL partitions that you saw in the other model. However, in the paid version, we can actually do an update table schema even based on this Power Query expression. So if we right-click and choose Update Table Schema, it'll just take a few seconds since it's going to contact the Power BI service and have it access the data source, in this case the Parquet files on the blob storage. And then as you can see here, it provides all of the metadata for this Parquet file. So I hit OK, and then immediately I get all of the columns imported and mapped. So the next thing I can do once I save this is that I can schedule a refresh of this table. And then on the Power BI service, it's going to start to refresh to load data from the Parquet file and into the table. And once this finishes, so this is a rather large file, it probably takes a minute or so for the full refresh to complete. But then I'll be able to preview the data in the table just as we did before. So this is definitely something that is interesting if you're using Power BI, the Power BI XMLA endpoint in the service. So either Power BI Premium per user or Power BI Premium capacity. Because in this case, you would most likely be working with Power Query expressions on your tables. And so you would probably need a way to update the tables or import new tables based on Power Query expressions.
Daniel, we got a question about refreshing partitions. If you could create a script to refresh partitions within a table.
Yeah. So yeah, that's actually one of the other few things that are still missing in the paid version, but which actually do exist and are on the roadmap. So if I go back to the free version and I go into the partition view, I can right click on a partition, and then I have the script option for scripting a refresh of the partition. I can even do that with multiple scripts. I can script a merge of the partitions if that's what I wanted. In this case, let's just script a refresh, and we just choose to script it to the clipboard. Script refresh to clipboard, and then if I just paste it in here in Notepad, you'll see I get the TMSL script that would be needed in order to refresh this. So this feature will also be coming to the paid version. It's just on the backlog of things that didn't make it into the paid version just yet.
Great.
Yeah. In closing, I should say that all features that exist in the free version will be in the paid version eventually. We want to have full feature parity so that the paid version is a complete superset of the free version.
There was a question somebody asked that I didn't ask earlier, but they said, "Do you do all this yourself?"
Until now, or until as of a couple of months ago, yes, I created everything on my own with some assistance from the community from time to time. But as of early this year, we started to build up a team around this. So now we have a support team. We have a couple of people who assist with support. We have our sales team, which is currently just one person right now, who's in charge of sales and licensing and so on. And as of the 1st of September, I'm actually employing a new developer who will help me build new features into the tool itself.
That's great. Well, I've personally benefited from it, Daniel. So thank you, and I'm excited to get into Tabular Editor 3. But we really appreciate you sharing with us this tool and all that it can do. It's really awesome.
Definitely, and keep in mind there's also there's a free 30-day trial if you would like to try out. You don't need to pay anything upfront, or you don't even need to give us your credit card information. Just go to downloads on the Tabulated site, hit the download link, and then you're good to go in a matter of seconds. So yeah.
Nice. Well, no other questions in the chat, but we appreciate your time, and thank you for sharing with us today and tonight.
Absolutely. It was my pleasure.
And thank you everybody who joined from all around the world and in Nashville. We do not have a meeting posted for next month, but it should be up shortly. Is that right, Seiko? We have somebody, I think, lined up for next month, but we just haven't got it.
We have somebody lined up, so we'll see something. Should see a meeting invite coming out soon.
Cool. Well, thanks everybody. Have a good rest of the day, and thank you again, Daniel.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Daniel.
Bye.